Amazing. Welcome everybody to this very special Inter-Intellect salon where we will investigate the future and actually the present already of anywhere jobs. This is in collaboration with Tony Blair Institute, and we have Luci Asanacha here who represents the stage from that angle. This is a special salon, so we have a stage. And we will give the mic often to our wonderful speakers. First of all, we have Lauren Razidi here, whom you might already know from her amazing videos with Visakandar Sami talking about digital citizenship and internet countries. Lauren is an author and the founder of Plumia, a nonprofit that is that is driven by a mission to build an internet country. Lauren, do you want to say a few words about this before we dive into the matters labor?
Sure. So thank you very much for the introduction, Anna. It's a real pleasure to be here. The kind of focus of my work, both at Plumia and the book that I wrote and published earlier this month, Global Natives, is really around this idea of global mobility. So now that we live in a world of remote work, it's more important than ever that people's right to move across borders is protected just as much as their right to move around within national borders. So I imagine in the conversation today, we will kind of get into this area quite a bit as we speak about digital nomads. But that kind of global mobility focus and lens, I think is really, really important and very topical where we are right now. And indeed, I think possibly the other panelists today will agree with me on that. So I'm looking forward to getting into it.
And if you guys want to question all of your life decisions so far, I really recommend reading Lauren's work, The Great Migration, which made me kind of convinced that I should move to Barbados within 5 minutes. If you're very attached to where you are right now, don't read it. Everyone else, go ahead. Thank you so much for being here, and I can't wait to delve more into how cities, citizenship, representation, taxation might change when we to kind of steal Parag's expression where we become uprooted and what that actually means. And this actually takes me to Parakana, author, leading global strategist. Your book, Move, is a fascinating exploration of how humans rediscover their migratory nature once technology enables us and basically global catastrophes propel us. You're also the co-founder and managing director of Future Map. I would love to hear more about this, and not just because you have a giant map behind you. Thank you so much for joining us from Singapore today. Do you want to say a few words about what makes you tick right now most? What are you most excited about?
Sure. Thanks so much, Anna. This has been, I think, a long time in the making, assembling this wonderful cast of characters. And a special shout out to Lauren. I'm a big fan, even though we've never met, but we've exchanged lots of ideas. And I love what you're working on. And the fact that you have managed to now engineer this movement and mainstream the things that we're going to be talking about today. The pandemic has helped, of course, but just a generation of talented youth that all of you, I think, on this call really represent is, I think, a huge force. When I started writing Move, I didn't think that it was going to be so generational. It was really a book about the future of all human geography, all 8 billion people. But I realized that if you're going to talk about the future, you have to focus on the people who are the future, which is young people. And those are the global natives that Lauren is talking about. Not all of them have that good fortune. So I do break things down a lot geographically. So my work is kind of the intersection of geography, globalization, mobility, geopolitics, and other kinds of things. But we'll get into things as we dive into the conversation.
Thank you so much. This is such a fascinating question. I used to be in academia, and in academia, the questions of generation are so important, especially in the US. Academia tends to be very migratory. You're kind of like sent around, you're looking for a job, trying to stay on the tenure track. And it's extremely generational. If you have 3 young kids, it becomes, you're much less competitive in that arena, for instance, compared with a single person, and all sorts of different considerations come into play. So it will be really interesting to see who can be a digital nomad and whether that can be widened across multiple generations. And I would also love to, if we have time, I know you speak a lot about Ukraine, and at Inter-Intellect, we are very dedicated to helping in any way we can. For instance, we hired multiple people through Remote Ukraine, to whom the proceeds from this salon will be donated, where you learn about another side of remote work, which is that when you can no longer, for whatever reason, actually work where you are, having access to digital jobs or digital residencies can be a lifesaver, sometimes literally. So it will be very interesting to explore that. And Samit Chopra, who's joining us from WeWork. And I mean, I know that you are the CEO International EMEA Pacific, which is already like a huge group of digital nomads that you might have been observing in the past years. And I would love to hear, what excites you right now, what surprised you the most, having access to so many life stories. I mean, even just at Inter-Intellect, all these hosts, I mean, you observe, people's stories unfolding across the years. And I can imagine that, managing WeWork, where all these stories really come together, must have been an incredible ride for you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thanks so much, Anna, for having me join this esteemed panel. Looks like I'm the token unauthor or non-author. So really looking forward to the insights from Lauren and Parag, and of course yourself.
We try to be inclusive. We always have somebody who hasn't published the book yet.
So, I've personally, I've lived globally mobile life my entire career. I started, I grew up and started my career in India. Then moved to New York in early 2000, went back to India for a couple of years, then Palo Alto for 3 years, London in 2013, then moved to Singapore in 2019, and then just boomeranged back to London a couple of months ago. And these kinds of this whole trajectory that I've been able to enjoy has obviously afforded me a very diverse perspective on business practices, cultures, obviously what's been happening over the last couple of years and how it's really shaken the core of everything we believe in from a work perspective or a life perspective. And things will continue to evolve. We are at a bit of a cross section, if you will, in how the future of work is going to evolve, how people are going to see themselves as contributing to businesses that they're part of, and how the external environment is going to sometimes continue to challenge like it has in the last couple of years, and hopefully in some ways in the near future facilitate what people's dreams and aspirations are for their personal lives and how they intersect with their work. So yeah, it'll be interesting times for sure.
I love this angle on dreams. When life changes and when possibilities change, people's dreams get an update. And I was born behind the Iron Curtain, and I've lived through this gradual opening of the world. And every time the world, bulged a little bit, my dreams became bigger. And I'm just like one person of the 8 billion. So when we look at global trends, you are looking at potentially billions of people who are given new dreams. And I see our responsibility as giving fodder to those dreams and opportunities and avenues for them to become true. So we will definitely talk more about opportunities, equality, and dreams. And now we're going to go to Christy Ians, who is the Director of Digital Government at Tony Blair Institute, to talk a little bit about where your interest springs from in this huge, you published this incredible report, a beautiful deep dive into every possible angle on this topic. So I would love to hear, where are you guys at now, and what are you guys most excited about?
Yes, hi everyone. Delighted to be here with you, and especially alongside such expert fellow panelists. It's really great. Like you say, Anna, I'm the director for the Digital Government Unit at Tony Blair Institute, and our job in that team is to really explore what a government should look like given the way technology is transforming our societies and our economy. What can be the relationship between the citizen and the state, and how can we use tech to transform public services? And so if earlier in the year, spearheaded by the wonderful Lucia, who's on the call, we developed this partnership with Inter-Intellect to co-host a series of salons like this, where we could try and open up that kind of tech policy debate to a much broader audience and foster some really creative, productive conversations, because we think that tech policy isn't a niche or a kind of specialist interest or a nice to have. It's to understand tech policy questions is actually to understand the fundamentals of how governments need to serve their populations. And yeah, that looks particularly different in the context of the way people are working and the way they are traveling to work, and the way what they need from their governments to support them in that journey is changing so rapidly. So really excited to be here. And when you compliment our work, Anna, which is super kind of you, I blush a bit because I can't take any credit for the brilliant literature review that we published earlier this year. That was entirely the work of Pei Chin, who is also here in the Super Salon, and our colleague Ollie, who is not. They are the ones that put the months into reading a really wide selection of the literature and coming up with a bit of an overview, as you say, of who is working via digital platforms specifically, and what's that like for them, and why do they do it, and where do they do it, and that's the theme of a major project of ours that we're pursuing at the moment. I should mention as well that our sister team in the Institute has put a lot of research into this area as well, into the theme of anywhere jobs. So our colleague Jiga Kakad has also published a couple of papers where setting out some perspectives on to what extent people are going to be working remotely and working differently from the way we work currently. And so yeah, it's a huge theme of interest for us, and really looking forward to getting into some of the big questions it raises for not just us as people, what can we do with our lives, how do we want to live our lives, but for companies, how do you find the right skills and talent, how do you make sure you're looking after the people that work for you when they are distributed around the world, and how do you get what you need from them, and even governments, how do you make sure that you foster skills and talent, you equip people to go out and take part in this global labor market, and how do you as a country become more attractive to talent now? Talent is a resource that can fly around the globe within minutes. So yeah, I'm really grateful to you, Anna, for hosting this with us, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Christy. I love this part in the reports where you guys are talking about this free market between countries where they are competing for new residents. And I was reading it, I thought, this is so healthy. This is how countries should be. They should be like, outbidding each other and how many, perks they might be offering for me to move there. When you actually have a cohort of global citizens who can go anywhere, and they are no longer just the wealthiest people who invest to immigrate, it becomes really, really interesting. I would love to kick off the panel discussion just with a look at what an anywhere job is. I mean, obviously, you three experts arrive from three different directions. So whether that's digital citizenship, the global strategy, and immigration, or creating the most beautiful network of co-working spaces around the world that will create new businesses, collaborations, wealth. What does anywhere job mean to you on this particular day, May 27th, 2022? Lauren, do you want to start?
Sure, thank you, Anna. So I think from my perspective, anywhere jobs really is referring to this kind of section of jobs that now exist, which can be performed remotely, flexibly, and from anywhere. And I think it's a really, really helpful term because it helps us distinguish between what I would call the sort of in-person industries and the kind of anywhere industries, because I think it's a huge kind of a huge issue that we need to dissect and kind of find solutions for, that actually now we have quite a segregated economy in the sense that some jobs can be done from anywhere, and thus the people doing them have a lot more control and flexibility and freedom over their lives, versus the kinds of jobs that just cannot be done using digital technologies because they in fact involve face-to-face kind of transactions. So an example of that might be somebody working in a shop or a supermarket. It's very, very difficult to do that job remotely. And I suppose the alternative to having somebody do that job would be a robot, but we are certainly not at the point yet where that is a reality. So instead, we're kind of in this space where new inequalities are emerging. And a lot of my work really focuses on trying to rethink those systems and come up with better solutions for how these things can be managed so that we're not kind of exacerbating existing inequalities, or indeed introducing new ones.
This is so interesting. We had a salon a couple of days ago with Eric Brynjolfsson from Stanford. Jason Crawford from Progress Studies hosted it. And Eric was joking that, the bad way for Amazon to have revolutionized the book selling industry would have been to like put a robot in the shop. And that's not what you need to do. You need to rethink the whole system if you want to, create a digital book selling economy or selling economy in itself. It's really interesting that you single out one-on-one jobs or contact professions as not digitizable. But when I look at my friends, for instance, a really good friend of mine is a tattoo artist. Like, he's the biggest nomad in the world. He's like, most of the map, are super happy to get tattoos. He just like gets on the train, runs around Europe and sets up shop. So do you see a subsector of these service professions as nomad?
I absolutely do, actually. And this brings up a really interesting point I've not really had an opportunity to talk about in public. So thank you very much for bringing this up. I think that particularly, I'm not so up on the tattoo industry right now, but certainly in the hospitality industry, which is one that I am much more familiar with, there is this kind of new subset of nomads who are in fact involved in, for example, specialty coffee or craft cocktails. And it's essentially like this very creative, artistic kind of craft culture that's emerging around the world. And what I'm seeing in my kind of social circles is actually folks moving around the world and being nomads and sort of picking up residencies on the way, which is something I love because it feels like applying some of the models that we're very familiar with as writers or artists to a broader spectrum of jobs. So I think this is opening up new opportunities as well. But to bring it back to my term, which I will say so many times in this conversation, global mobility can be really restrictive in terms of people being able to do that safely, legally, and actually with social protections that would come with traditional work. And this is essentially what we need to solve at this point in time, is making sure that policy and visas are kind of keeping up and are made available so that people who are experimenting with anywhere jobs can actually move around the world without sort of being restricted automatically by the insane levels of bureaucracy that many countries require before you're allowed to go and, for example, do a cocktail residency for 3 months in a bar in Thailand.
I love the residency, strand in your writing is absolutely fascinating to me, and I will definitely want to come back to that and what that kind of intermediate. Parag, do you want to jump in? Anything to say about residency? I saw you light up in green.
Plenty, of course. And it is let me make a couple points. The first is that the narrative that has accompanied the COVID lockdown is that global mobility somehow ceased. But actually, if you look at the kind of global data, relocation in terms of aggregate volume of people who continue to live or live in a place other than their geography, their nation of origin, has continued to expand. And I think that's a very important point for all of us to clarify as a baseline when we're having these conversations, not just amongst ourselves who get it and understand it and see, but also when we're speaking in the general public. And it's actually very, very interesting because it's a reminder that whereas an older generation kind of drove the narrative around the lockdown being the new normal forever, and everyone retreating behind protectionist, nationalist, insecure barricades and being at home, the real sort of change agents of the world, which is again the youth, said, wait a minute, this is an opportunity to be anywhere, not just the somewhere that I happen to be. And that's one of the reasons why, it's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons why that number actually grew. So don't let the global narrative be shaped by people who are not the ones doing the moving. Understand that the numbers are very much on the side of those that are in this room, in this conversation. We need to kind of fight that battle with data. And that's very important because that's how policy changes as well. Now, why did we go, and Lauren would have the exact number, but from a world of 2 countries with digital nomad schemes, digital visa schemes, to 75 countries with digital visa schemes over the course of a year or 2? Well, the answer actually lies with something that Lauren was talking about, which is the kind of fundamental economics of it. When suddenly your services sector is deprived of the movement of people in and out of a country. So you no longer have those tourists, those business travelers, exchange students, whatever the case may be. You're not hosting those conferences and meetings. You realize how damaging it is to your economy. So at the same time that we were having this great lockdown, countries were saying, oh my God, we better wake up to the fact that we desperately need people coming in. And so let us engage in this global war for talent. This global war for young talent, to me, is the operating principle of the entire future. And everything that relates to residency reform is a contribution to that. It's a salvo, it's a move, a chess move in that game, because there's two kinds of countries in the world: those that realize that they need young people to replenish their demographics at a time when the world population is actually hitting a plateau, and those countries that don't recognize it. And so often our narrative about what the driving forces are in international migration is shaped by Trump or Viktor Orban or the five-star movement in Italy, or whatever the case may be. And I think that's complete nonsense. And again, you need to fight against that anecdotalism by saying, well, last time I checked, Canada, lets in 400,000 people every single year. It's statistically a lot more significant than whatever, whoever the kind of populist leader du jour is in Italy or some Eastern European country, no offense. Right. And the same is true of the fact that it's easier to migrate to the UK today than it was before Brexit. The fact that Germany has let in, well over 1 million, again, voluntarily or involuntarily, right? But you have a center-left government now in Germany. So country after country is actually getting on the right side of history, the right side of policy, and engaging in this global war for young talent. And that's actually what is happening. It's not aspirational, it's not naive, it's not utopian, it's actually today's reality. And that's because, and this is just the final quick point on the economics, is that even with a world where we selfishly can be digital nomads, from a national fiscal standpoint, without a strong domestic services sector, you don't really have an economy. You don't have a society. You don't have taxpayers, right? You don't have teachers and construction workers and garbage collectors and government bureaucrats and all of those things. And those are what are called non-tradable services. And meaning, again, those bricks and mortar things that people physically do in one place for each other. And so even if you're a country that is, attracting young people, or even if you are, again, there's a sort of, it's the buy side and the sell side, if you will, right? So the digital nomads get to choose where they are. That's fine for us, right? We can arbitrage by tax or by culture, longevity of stay and all of these things. But countries are realizing they need a resident population. Those are taxpayers and people who are renting apartments and buying homes and all those other things. So there is that non-tradable side of things that we shouldn't forget, the physical resident population of a state that keeps a state healthy. And I've been looking at the countries that are doing it right and the countries that are depopulating. And I worry a lot about the countries that are rapidly depopulating. And we put a lot of attention on those countries, even though they are very fundamentally the losers of the present and the future.
Thank you so much. One of the things that I'm always interested in when it comes to digital nomads is you have a bunch of people, moving around in the world. And they are by nature a diaspora, right? So you have Parisians leaving Paris and going to Thailand or Southern America or, Northern Scotland, depending on their taste. How are they forming a unified voice to make an impact? How are they impacting their local governments? So to me, it seems like, I'm a digital nomad, I arrive to a country. How will I find the other digital nomads? How can we align our incentives, our goals, and create an impact together?
Do you want me to give a couple of examples?
Absolutely.
Oh, sure. I mean, there are places where this has already been happening for a very long time, where expats have formed a large community and have clustered for at least a generation. So two places that come to mind, very obvious examples, are Singapore and Dubai. Over the last 40 years, almost no place in the world has had its population increase as rapidly as Dubai's has as a percentage of its original population. Only Shenzhen would exceed that. But obviously in Shenzhen, the population is still entirely Chinese, whereas in Dubai, it's sort of the whole world. And foreign communities that are not going to become citizens have still acquired a greater voice as stakeholders, and they've been recognized as stakeholders, and they have, now that technology has come into play, they have digital dashboards, there's interfaces with the government, they participate in discussion groups and consultations, modulus kinds of events where foreigners used to not be invited and are invited. A lot of things have happened, like as you probably know, unmarried people can live together. You can now consume alcohol. They've changed the work week from Monday to Friday instead of working on Saturday. All of these things have happened in Dubai as it's internationalized and as foreigners who again are not citizens, right, have a growing prominence, and they've self-organized in a number of ways. In Singapore, things are very sort of communities are rigorously defined, but they have community associations, national associations of expatriates that really overlap in their membership. And the government, they have a very strong dialogue with government. So I think that those are good templates for places. As some of these new, I would say in other words, what we're experiencing right now is a second wave of geographies that are becoming digital nomad destinations for the first time. And they're going to go through that process where they have to evolve their governance to accommodate these new resident populations and their lifestyles and needs and requirements from a legal standpoint or just logistical and professional and otherwise. And I think they can learn actually from some of those things that have already occurred in the first generation of places, and then they can also innovate, obviously, too.
Thank you so much. Samit, I'm going to throw the mic at you back to London. Every friend of mine who works in WeWork, the first thing they do when they arrive to a new place is they go and try to work in the nearest WeWork. So it's a really beautiful example of the 21st century Canterbury Tales. You go to the inn to meet your new friends, people with whom you instantly have something to talk about because you're entrepreneurs, you work at startups, you work in design, you are inventing the future. So what does an anywhere job mean in this network? And does it count? Do I count as having gone to a new country if I go to the WeWork first, or am I still in New York technically?
That's always a good start in any new country or city. I think it's very interesting how some of the things that WeWork was founded on, the principles and the genesis of how we imagined the world of work to evolve over the last decade or so. At the time, obviously a novel idea to basically build a business which is in the real estate industry, but really center the whole strategy or the value proposition around hospitality and experience and community. And 10 years, 11 years since WeWork was founded, based on the events in the world that have occurred over the last couple of years, it just seems like that the value proposition that we imagined almost 10, 11 years ago is sort of writing itself. So if you think about some of the things that Parag mentioned or Lauren around your initial question about anywhere jobs, the reason why this has become so topical today, of course, work-life balance was always in the mix, in different ways, but the whole notion around anywhere jobs has become so real now, especially given the last 2 years have been a write-off for most people around the world. In terms of the personal experiences, especially that they were able to enjoy. Of course, everyone was still working mostly from home, utilizing platforms like Zoom or other ways to connect with their colleagues and partners. But what suffered was the opportunity to gather personal experiences. And today, 2 years after we were all dealing with this challenging situation, people are yearning, people want to have the opportunity to be able to combine, having, some personal experiences along with, their productivity goals and their respective jobs. which is probably why the whole concept of being able to explore anywhere jobs has picked up even more steam, over the last couple of years than it was in the past. The other point I'd make is I feel almost any job has a component of it which can be an anywhere job. So I have a job which is very customer facing, very employee facing. Whether it's what I do on a day-to-day basis or platforms like this. So it's a very externally facing job. But of course, there are components of my job which are also very internal facing, where I'm looking at analysis or thinking about strategy, etc. And the reality is that part of my job can be an anywhere job. Now there are also jobs which can be a somewhere job, right, which require you to have at least some kind of a platform for you to be productive or more productive, especially when you need to interact with your colleagues, partner with them, collaborate with them, etc. And then of course the default or the previous default, which is your workspace or your office space. And I think as the world settles down, as individuals settle down over the next few months or a couple of years on what's that right model for them, what's the right balance, and they're able to align that with what the strategy and what the expectations from their employers or the businesses that they're part of, these things will evolve. I think the categories that we think about, and we were discussing earlier, they will change. I think the jobs that currently sit in each of those categories will change. And we might come up with new categories and new types of jobs which sit in these new categories. So it's, I think it will be an ever evolving, exercise or notion that we will see unfold in front of our eyes over the next 2 to 3 years.
Thank you so much. I love this notion that every job has an anywhere job element to it. Or at least we hope so. And if we're clever with juggling our tasks, we can kind of like cluster those tasks together and maybe spend them once on Madeira or some other beautiful location. Sami, do you see WeWork as a participant in creating a movement? Do you feel like you guys started something and then the world caught up? Do you see your locations as a place where people kind of increase each other's digital nomad ambitions, or this is something that's just a side effect to your job?
No, it's not a side effect at all. As I said, WeWork was founded on the notion of hospitality, experience, and communities. I think all these three things, especially in today's environment, have become even more important, even more critical, and bring even more value to every member that we have in our network around the world. If you've been to a WeWork, you will see that the environment we create is very, very engaging. It's very live and lively. It is a bit of a melting pot of people, from very different backgrounds, different professions, different industries, et cetera, et cetera. And all of these things, supported by our hospitality focus, as well as our technology platform, et cetera, they are basically things which were built originally and have been improved over the last 10 years or so to provide opportunities to our members and anyone who is coming into a WeWork to have the opportunity to engage with other like-minded people or not, right? And entrepreneurs could be hobnobbing with professionals, lawyers, financial wizards, etc. And two is to be able to enjoy the experience in being in an environment like WeWork, which again, going back to my earlier point of people really wanting to build their cachet of personal experiences. And I think what we are able to do is we are able to collide or really meld that need for people to have a unique experience or an enhanced experience, but in an environment where they also do work, which I think, going back to your question, has sort of evolved in the right direction for us over the last few years, especially.
I absolutely love this. And I think that, I mean, for me, the only way that the world has caught up with me was that now, because of COVID, everybody else also has to wash their hands a lot. And I kind of feel like I won. But I can only imagine that when it's your entire organization, this is a little bit like the puzzles falling into place and everything turning out right. Christy, you have your hand up. I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I was going to ask Samit a question as well, if that's all right, about the risk of grilling you, Samit. I was wondering, we think a lot about to what extent this phenomenon is limited to a certain sectors of the economy or certain segments demographically. And I know from speaking to Lauren and from listening to you just now, Parag, that actually there is reason to think that it is something that can grow and grow. And I certainly hope that's the case. But I wondered, commercially, how does WeWork see the kind of anywhere jobs market, or the very mobile either freelancer and sort of company model growing? Like, how far down the value chain can it go? Do you see a scope for differentiation? Like, for some people, WeWork would probably still be out of reach at the moment as an individual or a freelancer. Like, how much bigger can it go? How much more of the market can it serve?
Well, I think it's thanks for that question, firstly, Christy. So, the world, as we've seen, especially over the past few years, the need for flexibility has never been higher. And it's not only from the employer's perspective or the company's perspective, but as we're discussing, the anywhere jobs, concept, which is really a workforce revolution that has unfolded in front of our eyes over the last few years, which basically puts the spotlight on employees or professionals or freelancers, entrepreneurs wanting that flexibility to write their own script of what their idea of work is. Do we think there is scope for this to explode into something much bigger than it currently is? Absolutely. Right. If you read any real estate research report over the last 3 to 5 years, almost every large real estate services firm calls out the flexible space industry, which is what we are a leader in, to grow almost 7 to 10 times the size it currently is. We're still a very small portion of the commercial global real estate industry. But this need to have more flexibility, which is causing many new entrants into the market from different parts of the industry who want to bring their own concept of what flexibility looks like. And that trend will continue from a supply perspective, or people who want to provide solutions like the ones WeWork provides, obviously on the back of an increasing demand for all sorts of employees and entrepreneurs, to have more flexibility. Now, for us, almost half of our membership base, which now is roughly 650,000 members globally, half of it is what we call small and medium businesses and entrepreneurs, freelancers, and the other half is large enterprise companies. So really, there's no entry barrier to what type of professional or person can utilize a network like WeWork's, as well as we have many solutions within our services portfolio which allow you to utilize our network or our location for an hour, for a day, for a month, or for several years. So we've really taken down the entry barriers such that WeWork can be that third place or that somewhere place for any type of professional to leverage and work out of.
Thank you so much. Before I open the floor for questions, Lauren, I would love to hear from you. How do you see professional networks such as WeWork influencing the digitization of citizenship, and how can we do better? How can we participate from the private sector?
Sure. So maybe just to start with the kind of general point, the Nomad segment is growing really, really fast since remote work went mainstream, and companies have truly already begun responding. Normally, when I speak at an event like this, I will give WeWork as an example of this in terms of, I know you guys launched I think I'm struggling for what it's called, but a sort of anywhere pass. I use a WeWork in any city. What is that called, Samit?
On demand.
There we go, on demand. So yes, I often cite WeWork as a case study for that move. You can also see in the broader market, Airbnb has gone very much all in on a work from anywhere future and a live anywhere future. So you have Brian Chesky, the CEO there himself, living in Airbnbs for 12 months at the moment to sort of promote the lifestyle. And you also have sort of a lot of data that they are releasing to basically say that since COVID, stays are much longer and there are people living full-time on Airbnb. So I think that's a really interesting example. Kind of in response to that, we also have hotel companies now entering this space. So hotel companies switching up to focus on monthly stays, and even a few sort of nomad hotel brands coming up. So one that I actually lived in for most of the pandemic is called Zoku. They have locations in Amsterdam, Copenhagen, Paris and Vienna, I believe. And they've been around for a while, but they're essentially perfect for the nomad market now because it's micro apartments with a co-working space on site, events, community. So you can really see this kind of coming up. And I think the other thing I wanted to add is that the Plumia mission, the mission that I run, is funded and operating within Safety Wing, which is a global company, fully distributed. I'm a member of their team. And we essentially provide remote health insurance for the kind of enterprise market. So for big companies looking to give their workers the kind of global borderless health insurance product. We also have Nomad insurance for individuals, and we're going to be launching some new products around income protection, pensions, and remote retirement, and also remote doctor, allowing you to essentially have a GP you can speak to via Zoom. So we're doing a tremendous amount in this space. And we recently raised a 35 million Series B, which I think just kind of demonstrates the appetite now in investor circles, as well as the kind of larger private sector for working in this area and really kind of pushing forward to make this future possible. And the final point I will just make as kind of giving commentary on the wider market is increasingly we're seeing intermediary services such as Remote and Deal. And these services essentially take a lot of the tension and a lot of the problems out of the process of hiring people from anywhere in the world. So if you're a US-based company and you want to hire somebody in Poland, but you don't have an EU entity, these companies are acting as employer of record, so allowing you to do compliant hiring in all these different markets across the world. And a lot of the time when I'm speaking to entrepreneurs or business leaders, they're saying, I would love to sort of give this flexibility to everybody, but actually it's very impractical. It's going to cost a lot. And I think it's really interesting to look at some of these startups that are kind of rising to that challenge and solving the problem to unlock a work from anywhere future.
Thank you so much. And I think Parag, you want to jump in?
Well, I was going to echo that. So if you were to create a kind of taxonomy, or even just more, sort of simply phrased, just a laundry list of things, of platform services that people need who want to be digital nomads, right? And you can clearly see the products that are developing behind each of them. And Lauren has mentioned some really good ones. If you think about it, before digital health records, it was very hard to do this, but now you have that digital GP option. Before WeWork, you would say, oh, well, I need to go work for a company, otherwise where would I sit and work? But it's like, well, actually you purposely go to a co-working space to find a network and find the work that you're going to do. And you have a global membership, right? Now you also have home sharing agreements, right? So, I mean, you can, Airbnb is one thing, you can just show up somewhere and whatnot, but there's also international or sort of housing owned by one company, and you have access to those properties in different cities that are considered the kind of preeminent or desirable places. So you don't have to, you can actually pay rent or have a contract but be living in different places under the same rental agreement. So your price that you're even paying doesn't even change. And then the pension services that Lauren mentioned when it comes to that's what Safety Wing is pioneering. That's been very, very difficult to engineer. Most people, certainly an older generation, even yeah, I mean, certainly our parents' generation obviously had to collect their pension in the country they live in. And still only very few countries do their kind of digital payment, and don't discount your pension based upon where you're receiving it. So the globalization of pension distribution is absolutely critical. And on it goes. I would say that a couple of the barriers, and actually then there's one, is it Atlas? ATLYS, I think, that is kind of standardizing visa processing onto a single app. So, it's kind of like if you lived in America as the common application for a college application, it's like a similar thing. You just provide all the common data that's required by most governments for a visa application, and now they've kind of standardized that. So on and on the list goes of those kinds of. Another one obviously is, I should mention cryptocurrencies, right? Even if they may be temporarily falling out of favor, the idea that you don't have to be physically proximate to, your country and financial institution and bank and collect things in only that currency creates, again, a certain liquidity, fluidity internationally. The final thing would be education, right? That's one last piece. And this has been one of the toughest nuts to crack, especially for young families. When we were doing a sabbatical in Berlin a few years ago, everything could kind of be done almost last minute, which is really different from, again, 10, 15 years ago. Pretty much we decided where we were going to stay and all these other things last minute. But where to put our kids in school, that took 7 months of planning. Right. So now a whole host of companies have come along and are catering to that. And you've heard of a bunch of them, Boundless and so forth. And, they've got a presence in all the key cities. You can kind of show up, plug and play, and they more or less cater to the K-6 market. Older than that, or high school level, now more and more is remote, right? So, wherever you go, you can still do online skill building, online courses, and so forth. And that's maybe one of the last shoes to drop. And I think that's a huge opportunity, obviously, at all age levels. So we are fundamentally creating those digital platforms and global access points for pretty much anyone and any need you may have. In the Maslowian hierarchy, effectively can be met. And I think that all of those in tandem, it's not just one or the other, right? It's all of these things happening over the last 5 years and the next 5 years that are going to enable a far greater number of people to be digital nomads.
Thank you so much. This is extremely exciting. And when I envision a cool, boundless, creative expat in a hotel for months, I immediately think about Hemingway and Fitzgerald in Paris. But then I remember that no, because they had to work out from a cafe where everybody smoked and was super loud, and they did not have pensions or healthcare at all. So this is kind of the best of two worlds. You get the perks and the stability of a corporate job, but you also get the freedom to explore and create that is a birthright of a person. Why choose when with a little bit of rearrangement, we can have both? Thank you so much. Let's open the floor. I saw so many people nodding, smiling, having a personal story come up as our panelists were speaking. And now is the time to jump in.
Hi, I'll start it off. Hi, so I'm Aida. I live in New York now. Now I have to feel like I have to say that after talking with you all. But I'm from San Francisco originally, and I started off down a path going to medical school. I went to medical school in Cuba. As a U.S. citizen, there's a lot of huge international medical school program there. My husband also went to the same program. And I came back and realized that I didn't want to go into clinical practice, and had kids as soon as we came back. And so I've been a stay-at-home mom with my kids for the past 8 years. My husband is practicing in critical care here in New York. And one of the things, I learned Spanish while I was in Cuba. And one of the things that's been a big priority is teaching our kids Spanish. So we speak exclusively in Spanish with them at home, and they're in a dual language program here. And now that I am at a place where they're a little bit older and I can start thinking about what is my next step if it's not going to be clinical practice, this world of remote work is like right in front of me. And I realize it's a huge opportunity, and I have a real privilege to be able to engage with it. And so I want to be able to engage with it. And I wanted to follow up on the comment about families and mothers in particular, and like what is everyone's experience in working with families, and also I guess mothers in particular. I wonder if there is a different experience when mothers are working in this remote way and being able to travel with their children. So not just schooling, but also care outside of schooling for their kids, and what your experience has been with that.
Brilliant and important question. Thank you so much, Aida. How mobile are families, and how can we serve them better? Any notes, Parag?
Well, this is interesting. It's not just about the technological dimensions of it, because with smaller children, as many of us experienced during COVID, below middle school, you really don't want kids, learning remotely. That said, I think that the question has to be answered through the broader prism of demographic change, because again, the world population is reaching its peak much earlier than we thought. And one of the big reasons for that is that today's millennials and Gen Z are not having children at anything like previous rates of TFR, fertility. So what that means, therefore, is that if you imagine yourselves being in the case of Ida, right? You have one or two children, but you don't know many other people who have children, right? So if you are one of the only people as children, or even if you do know people who have children, but not a lot, and the services are not that great, one of the things that people haven't thought about is that for the next generation, which is again yourselves, millennials, Gen Z, and so forth, you will probably want to move to places where there are children, so that your children have children to play with. And I've never heard anyone make this argument, but I spent a lot of time kind of dwelling on it when I was looking at fertility rates around the world. And I was like, well, let's look at this at the very specific kind of geographical level. And so what I saw is that, in places like Helsinki, they're saying, we're going to have these free, kitas, kindergartens and whatnot for, mothers can always drop off their children there and then, go to work and have time to do their thing. And if you live in a place where the number of children is so small and childcare is not abundant, you don't want to stay in that place. You want to be in East Berlin. You want to be in Helsinki. You want to be in the places in the world where other families actually have children, because there are literally so few children. And again, that's the very macro global scale. And within that, though, it comes down to you, Taida. And that's why people are joining those communities that are enabling and creating those remote working sorts of communes. Because one of the key perks is that if you go to Lisbon and you stay in one of those communities that's set up by, those different companies, you have access to that childcare. It's built in. In the real estate market, even in New York, there have been efforts by major property developers like Tishman Speyer and others to do entirely new housing concepts. They have one called KIN. And the point is to welcome in families with young children, or even, again, multiple families with just one child, so that those kids have other kids to play with. So I think we'll be redesigning spaces. Actually, this was something that I think WeWork was going to do at some point, and probably should do again. Just some free advice that I'm sure you've already thought of over at WeWork. But I think it was a brilliant idea at the time, and I think it's still a brilliant idea right now. So think about the family structures, and there's so much data, right? We know on a month-to-month basis how many children are being born in which places in the world. Use that data to forecast where you need to be, and brand yourself as a child-friendly place, and then families like Ida's are going to move to where you are, because you always, as a parent, again, I know this firsthand, you want your kids to be in a place where kids are safe, where kids are abundant, where kids are playing with each other, where there's just a richly sized young generation. And the fact of the matter is, no matter what we do and try, the number of such places is decreasing in number.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'm in Brussels right now, and so many of my friends have children. And one of the reasons why they have children is because they can, because other people also have children, and they move here because they know that there are other people with young kids. And I observed, their support networks forming on Facebook and in WhatsApp groups. And I see a huge business opportunities, not just in building these networks for people, but also, for instance, if I have 2 kids and I'm trying to choose between 2 countries who are competing for my digital citizenship, I need information, and I want to maybe talk to the local parents first. And kind of a discovery product, I think, would go very far. Thank you so much. Lauren, you have your hand up.
I do. Thank you very much. I think I just want to yes and Parag a little bit there, but also maybe add a little bit more specificity from the kind of research that I've done and the experiences that I've had. So I'll start off by saying I don't have children. So nomading is very different for me compared with a lot of nomad families, nomad parents, but a lot of my colleagues at Safety Wing are full-time nomads traveling as a couple or even as single parents with their child. And I think that this is such an area that's ripe for innovation. I get asked a lot, like, is nomadism just a movement for young people? And my answer to that is always no, but the success that you can have as you reach these kind of later life stages, living as a nomad, comes down to the infrastructure and the systems that exist to support you in doing that. And I think that as a sort of specific point here that I want to make, which is, I think it can be difficult for us to actually unpack what education is and what the kind of value aspects of it are in today's world, if we look at kind of where it may go in the future. And essentially what I mean is that a child's education has 2 aspects. And one of those aspects is remote education, the literal curriculum that they sort of might take on as a remote learner, as opposed to a remote worker, and the stuff that they need to learn, perhaps to pass exams, etc. But then there's this other aspect of socialization. And basically what I'm expecting to see over the next sort of 5 to 10 years is a total separation of those 2 things. So you may have your remote education products from the University of Oxford or Cambridge or Harvard provided at that curriculum level, like they kind of do at the moment in some countries. And be able to kind of pursue that very high standard of education for your child without having to relocate to sort of be near a school that does that. But then the socialization aspect is really interesting because number one, and I guess I'm referring back to Scandinavia again, who have a lot of this stuff figured out, but in Scandinavian countries, I think, I've forgotten which specifically it is, it may be Finland or it may be Sweden, but one of the Scandinavian countries, they did a study comparing the attainment of UK kids and kids in this country and considering the sort of nuances, the differences in the education system. And essentially in this Scandinavian country, I can't remember, these kids do not go to school until age 7, whereas in the UK, it's much more normal to go to school at age 4 or 5. But what they found is that within 1 year, those kids had actually achieved more, had a better level of attainment than those in the UK who'd actually been in a formal sort of educational environment since 4 or 5. Now, the difference in Scandinavia is there's a huge culture of group kind of childcare, like a kind of play school thing. Kids are getting together, socializing, playing long before they actually sort of engage in more sort of rigid education with kind of a specific output. So I think that's a really interesting insight, and it kind of just shows that there are these 2 aspects that we have to pay really careful attention to with kids. And I think as we design these new systems and solutions, it's entirely possible to kind of be optimizing in both of those directions. And there is a huge sort of target market emerging for this. the final thing I just want to say really briefly is that I do think that a brand like WeWork that is international could do very well out of adding childcare as a service, i.e. you go to your WeWork and you know that there is a certain standard of childcare available on site, perhaps a little bit like old school offices where you'd be going to the office, but there'd be childcare on site. And I also think there's a potential here for hotels. You know, it's already quite normal in a lot of places around the world to provide babysitters for like when you're on holiday for a couple of weeks, if you want to go out for a romantic meal with your partner without the kids. And I could see that again becoming this kind of like built-in childcare provision for nomadic families. But yeah, definitely an area that I have my eye on, and I think there's a lot of work to be done, but I'm also very excited because a lot of very smart people are beginning to work on it.
Can I just weigh in on this? It's really critical for kind of broadening the concept of who is, you know, when we think digital, when we think nomad, not necessarily digital nomad. By the way, it is definitely Finland, by the way, where they don't start formal education until 7. But it's about the tiers. So the vast majority of people who do live outside their country of origin are not wealthy, high-flying digital nomads, right? It is, in fact, the temporary laborers who are maids and nannies and construction workers, primarily Asian, around the world at a very large scale. So think about the Indians in the Gulf and so forth. But when you are looking for that childcare angle, right, if it's not already present in the country and you have to bring it with you, just think about what happens when you know, a family with a decent income is applying and a Western citizenship is moving to a place to be a digital nomad versus now trying to bring your housekeeper, your nanny, you know, who your child has been growing up with you. Think about the different standards that apply to that person and the likelihood that that person is going to get the visa to come to that country. And it is 45 times more difficult, if not impossible. And that's the state of play right now. We have a system in effect that is, in some ways, I guess, I don't want to be too harsh, but you could call it, you know, immigration apartheid, right? So what we need is for those places to actually be fully attractive to young families or families with children. They also have to have a system that anticipates the needs for the second and third order kind of labor force kind of needs in that place, such as caregivers, nannies, and so on. So again, even in wealthy countries, you know, like America, you can't get a babysitter. So when I want to go out with friends, you know, they don't have one, right? So no matter how much money they make, they can't find a babysitter because there's just a labor shortage there. They literally can't go out at night, which is kind of preposterous because I'm speaking to you from Singapore, where most households, you know, or at least households that live in private residences have their caregivers live in the house with them, you know, as we do here. So we never have to give a second thought to having a, you know, movie night, date night, that kind of thing. And I think that's going to be, or should be, part of the definition, you know, almost of a civilized society, or at least a wealthy society, that you have that optionality. Well, and I mean it again in a very serious way. So going back to the whole migration apartheid thing, it's shooting yourself in the foot. You know, if we think about the COVID effect, the motherhood penalty of COVID has been so unbelievably severe in the United States. Some people say women's rights, you know, in the workforce have been set back a generation. Women had to, you know, put off their careers. They had to sit at home and babysit their kids while they were on Zoom, and they didn't have any support. And that's real. It's a real tragedy, right? I mean, especially for working women. And the effects of that are not fully calculated. Now, that I would say is not something that in a country where there's abundant childcare, women don't have to make that choice. But again, you don't have sufficient indigenous childcare in OECD countries. You have a huge deficit of it. So we need to think about the migration system, not just for digital nomads, but for the whole supplemental workforce that caters to those to those families, and we haven't done that yet. So, Lauren, at the very end of your comment, you said there's exciting things going on there. I'm not sure if you were referring to this challenge, because I don't see anything happening on this one, and I'm sure we can all agree, whether we're male or female, that this is just a great unsolved puzzle, but the key to attaining gender equity and maintaining gender equity in the world.
Yeah, my comment was not specifically on gender, but just the idea of, I guess, provision of services for nomadic families. But I totally agree with what you've just been saying, Parag. And I think it kind of leads me into another point I think is really important to make here. Digital nomads are kind of a frontier demographic that have started doing this and happen to be in this privileged position of being very desirable for governments for economic development reasons right now. But the whole kind of purpose of Plumia and the kind of movement that I'm a part of is to try and actually use that momentum to democratize global mobility rights down to more people. And within that kind of democratization of the sort of mobility right is obviously the need to develop the infrastructure that creates a more equal reality for people. So regardless of whether it's kind of a front-on sort of service for nomads to start, I think it's really, really important that we are always kind of looking to bring in a more a broader demographic to actually use these services. But at the same time, I do think that often there needs to be a kind of niche target market to start with to actually get the kind of investment and to get the momentum behind some of these things. So I think all the time, nomads are kind of the signal of what's possible. And there's a bit of momentum in terms of economic development, in terms of trying to attract new taxpayers, to kind of build off of nomads as that kind of early demographic. So that's really what we're trying to do in our work. You know, we want to start with extending global mobility rights to digital nomads, and we are pursuing a new passport as a means of doing that. But we also want to roll out that passport and those services to refugees and stateless people, all of these people who are stuck in a global system that is optimized for inequality right now. And that needs to stop. We have the technology to stop it. It's time for the culture to catch up.
Thank you so much. I would love to hear more about how you guys see, you know, the digital nomad revolution possibly solving some of the problems that arose around the motherhood penalty imposed by COVID. And I love this immigration apartheid expression. I think a lot of people, whilst trying to become digital nomads, realized that maybe they were at the moment residents of Western countries. Maybe they were from a non-Western country, and the moment when they actually tried to go with the rest of their friends to a desired location, suddenly there was this enormous delta between what was possible and what not. I do see a digital passport as something, even though no digital passport machine ever recognizes me, I have high hopes in general for this. I have bangs in the photo. It's a long story. It was a mistake, but I do have high hopes for whatever digitization we can implement around our official papers. Christy, you have your hand up, and then I'm going to go to Summit because we proposed so many new products for WeWork. I want to hear what you think about them, Summit. We'll see. Christy, first you, and then Summit.
Okay, well, this may be for Summit and maybe for Parakana and also Lauren. I was wondering, sort of building on this question of how digital nomads can influence the way governments behave, and that it sounds like increasingly their sort of economic power is being recognized, and you talked about how the culture is changing in Dubai and how there is now competition to improve the environment to attract people. I wonder, do you all three see any possibility for more formal democratic representation to change, to reflect the fact that people don't just sign up to be a member of one country or citizen of one country for their whole lives anymore? And I don't know how it works in Plumia, Lauren, but I would love to know, what possibility you see for people to kind of do almost democracy as a service, or democratic representation as a service. Like, could I buy in to be allowed to vote in a country's national elections for a period of time? Because I think in most places it's easier to get to vote in a local election, much harder to get a vote in a national election.
Well, I'm happy to jump in just initially on that. I think there's bottom up, top down, and sideways kinds of changes. So as foreign-born populations have risen in a lot of multi-ethnic in democratic societies, you've already had the recognition that that those residents, even as non-citizens, deserve voting rights. So, you know, in New Zealand and Canada, in certain levels of electoral politics in the UK, I don't know which ones, but many of you would know, you know, foreigners can vote, right? Foreigners vote for, you know, mayor or city council, these kinds of things. Perhaps not at the, you know, it just depends. Every country is slightly different, but there are definitely a lot more countries that are allowing non-citizens to have voting at some levels than was the case like 10 years ago. And I'm sure that there's a catalog of that out there somewhere. So that's one thing in terms of bottom up and top down. The other technological, I think, is not necessarily the key thing. It's the politics, right? Where the politics allows it, the technology will come in to service that market. So it really is a political issue more than anything else. But I think what's interesting is that as the stock of people who have passports that have that global access characteristic attached to them, right? A country that has, you know, 100 plus access to 100 plus countries, more and more countries do fall into that category. Pre-COVID, for sure, more countries were moving in that direction, and COVID is a temporary setback. But COVID will also unlock the efforts towards digitizing things further that were no longer possible to do in person during COVID. So I think that, again, you know, we'll have this kind of hockey stick effect moving forward. So people, if you belong to one of those countries that has access to more than 100 countries without a visa, you're less inclined to want or need to change your citizenship, right? So the reason why Indians, for example, myself included, you know, have changed their nationality more than any other country's citizens change their nationality is because the Indian passport is a low mobility passport. So the first thing any Indian wants to do, or at least by volume, there are many countries that rank below India, but there's no country with as many people whose passport ranks below where India's passport is. And hence, in terms of net outbound immigrants, India ranks, my hands cannot stretch far enough apart to capture the gap between India and country number two. Country number two happens to be Poland, by the way. And Poland has, 20 million people. India has 1.4 billion people, just to put it in context. So the number of outbound Indians, and therefore the number of Indians who are changing their nationality, is far, 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 far larger than any other group of human beings in the world. But again, India doesn't belong to that set of countries that I'm talking about that most digital nomads do. For those people, you're less inclined to need to change your nationality, but you do want to accumulate residencies. And that's the direct answer to your question. So do I have my nomad visa for Dubai? Do I have my golden visa? Do I have my tech pass for Singapore? Do I have my Silicon Valley thing? And whatever do I have my blue card for Germany? And you accumulate these sort of residencies without worrying as much about your nationality. So if you belong to one of those 50, 60, 70 countries, which is most of the people that we're talking about anyway, then that's what you're effectively aspiring to do, is to collect residencies, to collect optionality in a way, because you don't know where you want to be next month. But you certainly don't want to have to worry about applying for residency to that place that you're going to be next month, because you already have it.
Thank you. In the meantime, 3 people in the room have started packing for Silicon Valley, even though we're not quite sure we heard you correctly.
Silicon Valley is exactly the nickname of the program, and they've been trying very, very hard to lure people post-COVID. Again, it's a perfect example. It's the archetype of a place that depended on humans coming in and spending money, and then suddenly no humans were coming, and therefore the economy was crushed. So they're so desperate now to pull out all the stops and get people not only to come as tourists again, but to come and live there. And I employ a bunch of people who are in the Silicon Valley program, because I don't care where the people are who work for me, and it's much cheaper than Singapore. So I fully understand their desire to go and do that. So yes, pack your bags.
I love it. And I think this is a wonderful moment to go back to Summit. I love that whenever we talk about Inter-Intellect, we're always talking about how should we live. And one of the things that came up in the chat was that WeWork should be renamed We Live. But we propose so many ideas. Samit, what do you think? Do you consider this conversation a kind of research group meeting? You will leave with a lot of notes and say, I've just discussed this with a bunch of digital nomads, and this is what people want.
No, your consulting checks are on the way, guys. Thank you for all the ideas, and you're right. We did explore a couple of these concepts. We Live, of course, was one of the concepts we looked at a few years ago, and that was an extension of our core business value proposition of utilizing and building flexibility in our resources, which is for our core business focused on office space. We Live was more on the residential side. Of course, we as a business have since decided to focus on our core business, which is office space and flexible workspace. But I hear you. I think the notion or the concept of any such opportunity, which is built around communities and being able to share experiences as well as resources, especially in today's times, I think would resonate as a concept. Of course, one needs to look at how does the commercial model work for any of these ideas. However, I am aware many companies now who are pushing the envelope on looking at flexible residential platforms across the world, especially close to large academic institutions as well as large cities, which tend to attract a lot of transitional or mobile work populations. And we'll, as I said earlier, we will see how and where we land with some of these concepts over the next few years. But just going back to some of the things we were discussing earlier, with mothers at work and challenges and opportunities that such scenarios pose for all of us. We take all of these things. Obviously, we look at them very, very keenly. I think Lauren had an idea that we should think about a creche or a daycare type facility in WeWorks. Again, we have looked at these kinds of ideas. We do a lot already for half of our own workforce, which is female and or also for our members. So almost all WeWorks around the world now have a mother's room so that new mothers can have the privacy that they need for themselves during the day. Ideas like play school, creche, etc., where a location or the size of our location allows it, we would absolutely look at those kinds of things as well. So again, thanks a lot for all the ideas. We will absolutely take them to heart and see where we can implement them.
Thank you so much. I mean, the mother's room is in itself a huge help to people. We have 10 minutes left. Christy is adding a heart. If anybody missed that, I absolutely agree. I once worked in a co-working space in London. I was in a part of an incubator in Shoreditch, and they had a baby room. And just to come to work in the morning, which for me was 11:30, but like most people were there who had kids, they were already there at like 8:15, just to the laughter of children and knowing that, this is a holistic experience and there's no, work and life. We are one being. I found that very, very, very healthy, and the vibe was absolutely great. I had an idea for an intro question at the beginning, which would have been, if you could work from anywhere, where would you like to be calling in from today? But then I looked at you guys and you seem so perfectly happy calling in from wherever you're calling in from. I kind of dropped it. But I do have an outro question, and I think this is important. A lot of discussions around, anywhere jobs, dwell on the fact that this is an acceleration of something that we expected to happen. We had intuitions about the world and how fast education would be digitized, how, nomadic people might become, but something seemed very, very unexpected. And I would love to hear your opinions on what the most unexpected thing about anywhere jobs might be for you, something that is good or bad that you didn't expect, how you responded. And if you can add, what's your greatest hope right now about it, and where you're putting most of your energies, just so that our viewers have something to do in their personal time as homework. I might actually start. I will start and say what my biggest surprise was. I started Inter-Intellect around the world in living rooms, and we kind of gradually digitized ourselves into an online community. As the need arose, people started expressing that they actually want to hang out internationally with each other. The thing that I didn't expect was how incredibly deep human relationships can become digitally. We have married couples in Inter-Intellect now. People are starting books together, companies together. They actually move to new countries or resign from a job and move and become freelancers. So there is, how deeply just being together digitally can touch a person's life. That came to me as news. And with it, our responsibilities, because now you're dealing with entire lives and people's families and spiritual development and health and flourishing. So this would be my 2 cents here from a very particular angle. And this is an open question to everybody in the room. Just jump in when you have your answer ready. Thank you so much.
Well, I can go next. I think what surprised me firstly was how many Zoom calls I can actually attend in a day. I did not expect to be able to do as many as I did.
You and me both.
The other thing which I realized, I would say somewhere, I was in Singapore actually through most of the pandemic as well, and as Parag would know, the early part of the pandemic and the way Singapore managed it was, with very, well thought through and planned, restrictions, if you will, to make sure that we were safe, etc. And then as things opened up, and initially we were allowed to start interacting with a handful of people, and that number kept growing. And what surprised me after the first phase of things opening up was just how well entrenched the muscle memory had become for me of continuing to live that restricted life. Even so, when things opened up, I was still setting up meetings on Zoom rather than actually asking someone out for a coffee or a beer. And it took me, I think, 2 to 3 months to realize that I was just continuing to do that because I've gotten so used to that, to that Zoom world. And the last thing I'd say is, the challenge that we currently face, especially in the workspace area where, pre-pandemic, most employers, large or small, were operating with 2 constants, right? They knew how many people are going to come into work, and they knew where they're going to go and work, right? To which office. Post-pandemic, and based on everything that we've discussed today and everything that we've seen over the last couple of years, both those constants have now become variables. They don't know how many people are going to come in, and they don't know where they're going to go and work out of. And you can imagine, with all the challenges that we had at least in the business world or the workspace pre-pandemic, with those 2 constants, right? Challenges around brand, culture, productivity, etc. Those challenges post-pandemic, and now those constants becoming variables, is going to be 5 times harder. And yet it surprises me that companies, big and small, have still been able to at least form a view on what that new normal looks like for them and their workforce. There is no doubt in my mind that those definitions of the new normal will continue to change and evolve as things normalize further, and companies and employees and workers find that balance that they want to live their professional and personal lives through. But it is quite amazing that such a complex problem has been at least attempted to be solved by so many different employers, big and small, which I find quite fascinating in such a short amount of time.
I love that you brought up the new normal, and don't reproach yourself for hopping on Zoom calls, even if you can leave your house. We've been given so many new commodities during the pandemic. Why let go of something that's more convenient, easier, faster, cheaper for everybody? I think we will we will realize that online and offline mean very, very different things in the coming decade. Both have their own merits, but what we do in which arena or on which plane will greatly change. Thank you so much. Parag, I think you lit up green, go.
Well, maybe I'm always lit up.
You're always lit up, you have a natural glow, yes.
Well,
always ready with a wonderful opinion.
I was certainly very concerned when the lockdown began because my whole life has been about traveling, you know, and for me, the nomadism that I've practiced pretty much my whole life has been an opportunity not to pick anywhere or be anywhere, but to be everywhere. And I feared that eroding, but sort of actually very much like Summit, it was like, oh my God, I don't have to choose where I'm going to be any given day. I can be in 5 places in a day. And that's what, I mean, I traveled a lot through COVID. So there was only maybe less than a year where I actually didn't really travel. But during that time, it was great to literally be in 5 or 6 different places in a day. And that certainly I'd never experienced before. And that now we get to maintain. So this is one of the positive legacies. But the point that I want to make that I hope we all support as global nomads and global natives is that face-to-face interaction really matters. I mean, you know, for us professionally, working with governments and companies around the world and never even, you know, meeting them in person, it worked out just fine. But I still think of myself as, you know, I still see the benefit, feel the benefit, and I think all of us do in going out and still being there. So as things reopen, you know, the notion of being able to be anywhere shouldn't be an invitation to just stay in one place. And so I'm committed more than ever in a way to, now that things have reopened, to get moving again, basically. And I think that we don't want to lose touch. I certainly don't want to lose touch with the ground reality because it is so very, very, very different everywhere.
I love this. The first time I was allowed back on an airplane after the lockdown, I was standing in line for like 7 hours in Istanbul or something. And I was so happy. I was just like, let me queue up for security. I'm having the time of my life. I'm at an airport. I don't care, you know. So yeah, I think we learned the benefits of something that we used to whine about a lot. Thank you so much. Lauren, do you have a closing statement about what might have surprised you most, either personally or professionally about?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think for me, it's potentially a bit of a weird one that perhaps everybody hasn't felt, but the most unexpected thing and the thing I'm most hopeful about is that since the pandemic, I've really discovered that digital nomads have this very strong like culture and identity that is really broadly shared across the demographic. And prior to COVID, I hadn't really stopped to think about this very much at all. But it's actually, if you put a bunch of people who travel constantly sort of in one place for a while, they kind of go on the internet and they start talking about things. And I think really the Plumia project and a lot of the amazing work that people in this space are doing right now has really been kind of bolstered by that switch to remote work. And it's all been quite unexpected. You know, I meet with people now who I was speaking to prior to the pandemic, and we were like the weird aunts, you know, who like traveled a lot and then came back and were kind of understood from this very traditional context. I talk to them now and they are becoming leaders in their like virtual communities. They are becoming leaders on issues like nomad parenting or nomad visas or various kind of problems that are going on. So I'm super inspired by that. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what we can do with this momentum around nomads right now to deliver a world of global mobility.
I love this. New identity is a very healthy equalizing of different ranks. I remember, do you guys remember when the BBC dad was this huge meme and then the pandemic happened and we're like all the BBC dad, like that's like a normal thing that you're trying to, we have had every family situation, including somebody going into labor during an Inter-Intellect salon. So it's just like the normal thing. I mean, it was like just the beginning. It was absolutely fantastic. Thank you guys so much. Any other special notes from the audience, from TBI toward the end before we close and say goodbye to our wonderful guests?
I think I would just say very quickly that building a bit on what Lauren just mentioned, The future of work in light of what happened in the last couple of years is clearly a driver for people's understanding of how much agency they have in asking what they want. Obviously, with this series, we very much are trying to get communities and convene experts and thinkers like you guys here to talk about this and get people to have a say in it. And you'll find that people don't know how to talk about the future sometimes. I'm talking general population. And I'm hoping that the future of work stuff, which is, let's face it, everyone has, expressed, I'm happy that I'm working flexibly. I'm upset with my employer that he won't allow it. All of that. I'm hoping this will be a driver for the rest of the future of stuff that we need to talk about. So that's where I'm going to pin my optimism.
I love that. And that's such a beautiful kind of mission statement just to close with. Thank you guys so much for giving us your time, your knowledge, your open hearts. We learned so much. I'm going to order 7 books now. Thank you so much for adding those to my library. And I hope to hear from everybody else and see you guys TBI at your next salon, which is going to be about synthetic psychedelics. We will see how that interacts with digital nomadism. I'm sensing a lot. Take care, guys. It was a pleasure. Have a lovely rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.